The Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference brings together expert speakers with legal, clinical, and lived experience to discuss the impact of the law on people with mental illness and addiction. Our spring 2020 conference was postponed due to COVID-19, so presenters recorded their sessions, which are now embedded in the conference website along with their collateral information. Thanks to all our expert presenters, generous sponsors, exhibitors, volunteers, and the planning committee for the Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference. This is Jason Renaud with the Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference, and we're making an additional recording today in this time of Corona to talk to Beckie Child about coping for persons with mental illness and with addiction. How are we coping in these days? So Beckie, thanks for joining me today. And Beckie, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about yourself and how you got to this point?
So I have been hospitalized more than 20 times, and I have struggled with depression and anxiety and PTSD for most of my adult life, and if not before. And so I have not been hospitalized since early 2000. That was the last time I was in the hospital. I never say I will never be hospitalized again for psychiatric reasons. I just say I hope I never will be hospitalized. And then I do things to try and make it so that doesn't happen.
Right. And you are quite an important person in Oregon's mental health advocacy scene. You served on many boards and commissions. You're a teacher at Portland State University. You're a Ph.D. student also at the same university. You've got your hand in a lot of bowls.
Yes, I do. And I also work for a family peer support program, doing their data quality improvement.
Excellent. Excellent.
So, yeah.
And you're a member of the planning committee of the Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference. So thank you for your service. So Beckie, tell us a little bit about how you cope with these sorts of situations with anxiety and dread and fear and just the everyday worry, and what do you advise other people to do?
So the first thing, I have this rule about coping, and part of it was because I went to a day treatment program and I got to go to the fun and not so fun, actually more not so fun group called Coping Skills Group. And while I was there, every time they were talking to us, I'm like, hey, I'm here, I'm breathing, I must be doing something right. So if you're here and you're breathing, you are doing something right. And that's my first thing for thinking about coping with all this stuff. I also say coping is messy. Some days are going to be better than others. And if you can find a way to be gentle with yourself, I always tell people to go gently with them, because we all often live with what I refer to as the itty bitty shitty committee that's in our heads. And it's time to give that committee a vacation.
Oh, wow.
And
tell me a little bit more.
Especially during this time.
Yeah, tell me how to get that ruminating, that self-criticism to abate.
So for some people and for me, sometimes one of the things I do is I imagine a container that I can put my brain in for a while, because my brain likes to constantly think, and sometimes it thinks faster than I can process, and it overwhelms me. And so if I can make it the container out of titanium, if that's what I feel like I need. I can soften it with soft fabrics if that helps. And then I just say to put that on a shelf. And if I feel, sometimes we get really comfortable with the coping mechanisms we have.
Mm-hmm.
And if I put it on the shelf for too long, I start to miss it. So I just say, okay, so pull it off the shelf. And if you really want to look at that again, it's right there.
So
it's not like you've thrown it away.
So you actually visualize this container,
That
this
was a
shelf,
weekend.
this. Tell me a little bit more about that.
And so other things I do is the thing is to remember you have been through some really hard things in your life. I don't even know who you are, but I just know that that's how life works. And if you got through those really hard things, you're going to get through this hard thing. And it may not be pretty, but you're going to get through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you focus on that, and then one of my favorite heroes, I'm a Mr. Rogers fan, and I remember he talked to little kids about look for the helpers in times of big stress and fear, because there are helpers out there. And so I like to look for the good things that are happening out there, the ways that people show up for each other in ways that maybe we weren't expecting or aren't accustomed to thinking about. One of the stories that I remember when we were just starting with the coronavirus scare was the elderly couple who were too afraid to go into the grocery store, and they yelled at a woman in the grocery store parking lot and asked her if she would go and buy her groceries for them so they didn't have to expose themselves
mm-hmm.
in the grocery store, which she did. And that was so I take some solace in some of those positive stories. Yeah.
So you mentioned, and we just went by it very quickly, that there's good coping mechanisms and maybe coping mechanisms that aren't so great.
Yeah. So, and it's the human condition that we will do some things that are not in our best interest, and use it as a learning lesson. If you drink, getting drunk is probably not a good thing to do right now. I don't know about you, but the time I don't drink a lot, but when I have, I just know my thinking is usually not in a very good place when I'm done drinking. And so, avoid that. Avoidance is a great coping tool for a lot of people. I also have found I like watching bird trainer videos. I found one of my favorite bird trainers to watch. They're called Bird Tricks, and they're on YouTube.
Bird tricks.
Yeah, and I love watching their videos and watching them train parrots. I will probably never have a parrot, but I find watching them and the respect that they give the birds. And the thing about training birds is they're not like training people. The only thing birds think about are birds. They don't think about the human.
No.
And so they're working with birds that are having problems and having to be rehomed frequently. And how do you eliminate those problems? And so, like, one of the biggest problems with parrots is that they bite. So how do you keep from being bitten? Well, you do things that make it really difficult for that parrot to bite you. So if you feed it, or if you're going to give it like a treat for doing a trick,
mm-hmm.
then you only approach that bird as far just so they can barely reach your fingers.
Yeah.
Rather than putting your whole hand down where their beak is so they can bite your fingers off.
That sounds very prudent.
Yeah. I also have gotten interested in watching people that keep venomous snakes. And this is kind of partly my own personal fear I've had to get over with. I have a really a big fear about snakes, and I've had repetitive nightmares about them throughout my life. And so as I've been watching these videos, what I noticed and what they have in common with the birds are is that they treat the animals with respect, and the best um, and, and they also avoid being bitten. So you don't do things that are going to get you in trouble. So that means that you give the snake its space. There's things that you just don't do um, to avoid being bitten, because um, the bite that you get is the worst bite that you have, and that's kind of how our thoughts are sometimes. So that's kind of some of the ways that I'm using to cope.
So recognizing that some of those thoughts, like the snake, are dangerous, and if you're just playing with it,
Yeah,
you could end
yeah,
up getting bitten. You think you're in control of the situation, but there's the snake.
right.
Oh, okay.
And the snake has the most control. The snake can lunge at you. So if you think about if you're starting to worry excessively,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you put a time limit on it. Okay, I'm going to worry for 15 minutes, and I even set a timer so you have something audible that goes off,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's time to go do something else. And so you do something to distract yourself from worrying. And every time you catch yourself worrying, oh, I'm not supposed to be doing that right now. I did my 15 minutes of worrying today, or 30 minutes. You can set your own time limit about it. Or maybe you set it so that you have 3 15-minute periods throughout the day. You have to figure out what works for you.
So having a routine
Yes.
is important here. That's quite a bit of discipline. What other areas of routine are beneficial?
So it's really easy right now for a lot of people to not get dressed,
Mm,
because you're not going anywhere. You're not doing anything where you have
right.
to be wear clothes, for example. So making yourself get dressed, making yourself take a shower,
Mm-hmm.
um, washing your face with a warm washcloth sometime in the middle of the day, brushing your teeth, those things that help you feel human again. Um, those are important things to make sure that you're doing. It's fine to skip it periodically, but if you find yourself skipping it all the time, maybe you're getting caught into a trap.
What about some exercise that we can do? Does exercise
Yeah.
play a role
So
in coping?
going for walks, if you have physical limitations that make it difficult for you to go for a walk, um, there's chair videos or videos of chair yoga, or things you can do to stretch your body out
Mm-hmm.
so that you get your body moving in different directions. That will also help change your thinking. It may not change it dramatically, but if you're worrying and then you spend even 5 minutes doing yoga, chair yoga,
Mm-hmm.
or meditation, or um, uh, you know, just some simple exercises like um, standing at the sink and grabbing onto the sink and squatting down and then lifting yourself up.
Mm-hmm.
You do that
Mm-hmm.
for 5 minutes, and your brain's going to be in a different place than it was before.
It actually causes the release of some chemicals that will change your thinking.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
What other areas of routine would be helpful for someone who's having trouble coping with the day to day?
So in this time of isolation, it's really easy to isolate for a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe you have to push yourself to reach out to people. Call
And
somebody that you haven't talked to in a while.
right, that's all
Try to get
telephone at this
a person
point,
that you
or something like this. Mm-hmm.
can. Yeah. If you can video chat, do that. Um, FaceTime chat if you do FaceTime. I realize not everybody uses every form of social media, so do what makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, there are a lot of online support groups. I know that Dual Diagnosis Anonymous and other 12-step groups have
Oh,
gone
yeah.
to online meetings.
It's huge.
Yeah.
We may never
So
get
try
back in
that.
our rooms again.
Again, take what's useful and leave the rest. If something's not working for you, try something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For some people, coloring seems to be a thing that seems to help calm people's brains down a little bit. So there are adult coloring books. I even have bought um, coloring books that have swear words in them because sometimes I'm sitting in a meeting and it's not okay to swear and because I'm really angry at what's happening in the meeting. Having a coloring book where I can color in those swear words without saying them out loud sometimes helps relieve a little bit of that stress. There's also this thing called silent screaming, where you go through the motions of screaming, but you don't make a noise. I mean, if you live in a place where you can actually scream, I encourage you to scream, because sometimes that helps get out some stress. But if you can't do that, then do a silent scream. Go through all the motions of it and go, and sometimes that will
Or
help.
scream into a pillow or something.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just again, be thoughtful about the context of where you live. Is that scream gonna alarm people that are near you? If you live with people, you might want to warn them that you're going to do that. If your neighbors can hear you, you might want to think about how you do that, because you don't want to have the police called on you for that.
So talk to me a little bit about, a lot of us are real isolated and we're judging ourselves how we're doing. What are some, for you or maybe for others also, some red flags? At what point do we need to reach out and get some professional help?
So that's really going to vary from person to person.
Mm-hmm.
But if you find yourself thinking that you want to harm yourself, that you want to die, dealing with suicide is scary. And a lot of people feel suicidal and are not interested in acting on their suicide thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so they might say to themselves something like, I want to die, or I wish I was dead, or something like that, that can oftentimes be mistaken for suicide.
Right.
Or suicidal thoughts. It's not quite the same thing. And so, a lot of therapists are doing virtual meetings with folks using FaceTime and Zoom meetings and other forms of video communication. You check with, if you have a provider, you can check with them to see if they are willing to do that. I know that a lot of the mental health agencies around here where people get support from are figuring this out too. If you and they may not have got it all figured out, because a lot of these changes have come down pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to build capacity and have the capacity to meet the current needs is really challenging for providers. So, but just reaching out and saying, hey, I need some support. Can you help me? And then also reach out to other people that you know. Call somebody and say, I just wanted to touch bases with you today. I'm struggling with kind of keeping grounded in reality. And I also would say, if you can go for a walk and be really conscious about planting your feet on the ground and feeling the ground under your feet. That can help ground. If you, I happen to live across the street from a park that's filled with old growth forest.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with walking very long distances, but I use those trees to kind of help me in terms of grounding, and watch it. And I think about the roots going deep into the ground, and that helps calm me down and helps ground me. So those are
But these are all sounds like a collection of coping mechanisms that you have found for yourself in your own exploration. This is seem really part of your recovery, is to have these accessible to you, available to you, that you know what they are. So when you get to a crisis, you don't have to go sort of looking around and say,
Right. So one of the things when I used to get into crisis more frequently is I felt like I ran out of coping tools,
yeah.
and I didn't know what to do when nothing was working. And so one of the things I started training myself was to say, well, find something else,
Mm-hmm.
um, or start the list of things that you have to do over again. And I realized that not all coping mechanisms work equally well at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's not working, just try something else. Um, I had a psychiatrist who um, I really disliked, but he gave me one thing that really was helpful in kind of reframing my thoughts around being suicidal. And he said that when people are suicidal, it's because they feel like they're out of options.
Mm-hmm.
So I started using that to say, so what are my other options? And just by asking that question, it got my brain thinking in a different way, that I could come up with other alternatives that I hadn't thought before. I have to talk about for a few minutes financial stress right now, because a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
people may be feeling it.
Super important.
Yeah. So one of the things I do know is that there are a lot of people that we pay money to, like our cell phone companies, our credit card um, folks, our insurance folks, that they understand that this is a pandemic and things have been interrupted in a severe way.
Mm-hmm.
That if you call them and talk to them, that they may offer you a way to either to not make a payment right now,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to call and talk to them.
You can't just put it
And
off and say, I can't handle it.
yeah, and um, I'm going to send Jason, and he can post it when he posts the video, a handout about how to make calls when you're afraid of making calls.
No good.
Um, and that's really helpful. And then reward yourself. If you call one creditor today and make that phone call with them,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big deal. Now you may have several that you need to call, but if you call one, 5 days a week, you call one every day, you've called 5. In 2 weeks, you would have called 10 if you have that many creditors or people that you pay money to. Don't forget to call your landlord if you're going to have trouble paying your rent. They may not be in a condition to help you. Remember, not everybody's going to say, yes, we have a program for you.
Right.
Um, but at least you reached out and made contact rather than just not do anything or not pay.
So actually dealing with the problem, even though you don't have a solution, will cause your anxiety to be reduced.
Yes.
I see.
Oh, and another way, we did. I belong to an online support group that I've belonged to since in the late 1990s, and we used to set up a date or a day of the week where 3 or 4 of us would say, I'm working on paying bills today. Um, and so we would chat online. And this is mostly by email. And so we say, this is what I did. I emailed this person, or I called this person. I paid this bill today, as a way to kind of get some group support around doing this work. This is hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Coping is hard. If you find yourself taking an extra nap in the day because of it, so be it. This is hard work.
Let's wrap up by talking about, go back to crisis. And
Okay.
as this goes on, some of us are going to run out of these coping mechanisms, and we're not going to find others, or we're going to get into a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some tools here in the Portland area, and there's some national hotlines and some Well, what can someone do now while they're feeling okay to prepare for that maybe inevitable crisis?
So every state has what's called an advanced directive form, and they vary by state. So what works in Oregon, there's a form for Oregon. It's not going to work in Washington or Idaho or New Jersey.
So this
Okay,
is a
but every
psychiatric
single state
advanced
has their
directive.
own form,
Okay.
and you can complete an advanced directive, a psychiatric advanced directive,
Hmm.
so that you can state what your wishes are. Um, and one of the things that if you complete that form, put a copy of it, hang it on your fridge,
Hmm.
um, and put a note on it in front of it that says "in case of emergency," because if somebody comes to your house, they're going to look for something like that to try and help you out, and that's a common place people will put emergency
Right.
documents, so it's right there for anybody to grab. Also, if you can, add it to your medical record. You might be able to do that through the electronic records that your doctor's office is using. Send a copy to your doctor. Send a copy to your case manager if you have a case manager. Now, I realize it's hard to get copies made, but you could also send them an email and say, or leave them a voicemail message and say, I made an advance directive.
Yeah. This in
It's
my
on my
file.
fridge.
Hmm. Yeah. Put this in my file. Be aware that these are my wishes. What about telling friends or family members?
Yes, also make sure you tell friends and family members. It's important to have conversations. Um, and the way that this coronavirus is working, there may come a time when you're not able to communicate what your wishes are.
Hmm.
And they may need to put you on life sustaining equipment. People have different values and different beliefs about the value of life sustaining um, measures. Make sure you let people know what yours are. Um, and even if you don't have access to a copy machine, which a lot of people don't right now, if you write down what your wishes are in a notebook, you can call and tell people that it's in this notebook and here's where this notebook is,
Hmm. Hmm.
so that you've put some thought into it as to what you want.
But these are sort of separate things. A psychiatric advanced directive is when you're not able to think clearly, but
Yeah,
then a mortal advanced directive is when you may not be able, you're maybe dying or be
or
unconscious.
be unconscious or not able to. You have um, an oxygen, uh, a ventilator tube in your mouth.
But these are
Um,
two different documents. I'll put links to both of these below this video.
yeah.
What other sort of methods can we do to anticipate crisis? What can we do?
Um, I can't emphasize about giving yourself a break and remembering right now that everybody is having a difficult time. If you live in a, a place where you're surrounded by the same people, make sure you're finding a way to get some alone time away from those people. If that means going for a walk, if that means shutting yourself in your room for a couple of hours. Being in a small space and not being able to get away from people can be a big stressor. Um, and and sometimes we pick fights because we're bored or
Yeah.
because there's nothing better to do, and it's a way of distracting ourselves. So rather than picking the fight, figure out what else you can do to avoid that behavior. And if you do succumb to the behavior, all right, so you did. Don't beat yourself up for it.
Hmm.
Apologize for the impact of what you did and work to do differently.
I find making a quick amend takes a lot of anxiety around behavior that I'm ashamed of.
Yeah. And sometimes talking about what we do to hurt other people is really hard. Well, actually, not sometimes. I find it hard all the time. But
Practice,
keeping it
practice,
secret makes
practice.
it worse.
So Becky, give us some last words. What should we know going out the door here?
Oh, make sure you find ways to laugh. If it's watching silly cat videos or silly dog videos, one of my favorite dog videos is of this dog that got into the pool. Maybe I'll send Jason the link to it to help everybody out. And his owner, and he's not supposed to be in the pool, and he gets caught by his owner.
Mm-hmm.
And the dog knows he's in trouble.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious. I've watched it several times over, and it makes me laugh every single time. So just make sure you find ways to laugh. Be careful with the sarcasm, because sometimes people misunderstand sarcasm. If you tend to be a sarcastic person or make sarcastic jokes, just remember that everyone's stressed right now. So the ability to deal with sarcasm, and especially if it has pointy ends, which oftentimes it does, can cause harm to folks. So just be gentle with yourself and with other people.
That's a great way to end it, Becky. Thank you so much for helping us know a little bit more about coping in this time of Corona.
Sure. See you in the future.